So my purpose tonight as the CFO is to not try to convince or persuade anyone to vote in a certain way. My role is to provide information. In fact, I'm going to share reasons why some people might vote yes, why some people might vote no. Certainly at the end of the presentation, any clarity that you require, I'm happy to provide it to the best of my ability. But I'm going to simply give you information. My goal is to help people have the information they need to make an informed decision that's best for them and their family. So as you know, District 20 will have a mill levy override on the ballot on November 7th. And this particular mill levy override, what does that mean? Well, everyone who owns property in District 20 receives a property tax statement each year. And part of your residential property taxes go to the District 20, whether it's general fund, bond, there's different pieces to what shows up on your property tax statement. And that is where your dollars go. No matter what school district you live in, some of your dollars are going to support that school district for that area. So a mill levy override is asking the community to say, would you pay a little bit more in property taxes for these certain purposes? So that has to be on the ballot, of course, because that's not just a decision that I can make unilaterally or the Board of Education. It is something that must be voter approved. Now, the amount that we are asking for the mill levy override is $35 million. Now, it would be phased in over 3 years. So if it were to pass on November 7th, then collection year 2024 would be the first year that proceeds are coming in from the mill levy override. And it would be phased in over 3 years. So it would be about $11.7 million in year one. That's about a third of $35 million. Then in 2025, about $23 million, as now we're bringing in 2/3 of the overall amount. And finally, in year 3, we would be collecting the full $35 million. Now, if my slide went on, some people ask, Becky, does that mean it runs out after 3 years? No, it stays the same, and $35 million is the max amount it can be for this year, and this year, and this year, until I would keep going. So it's something that's in perpetuity. When someone decides to vote yes for the mill levy override, it is something in perpetuity to collect $35 million. Why has it been being phased in over 3 years? Because it tempers the impact on property tax payers. We know that, and I'll show you in a moment exactly what the dollar amount is, and we know it is an ask of the community to spend more money. And so, again, to temper that, it's phased in over a 3-year period. So what would the dollars be used for? 4 purposes. One is compensation for teachers and support staff. What that means is everyone but administrators. You might be wondering, administrators work very hard. They do a wonderful job in our schools as principals and leaders in our district. However, the purpose of the mill levy override is to take these dollars, this funding, and put them to those in our school district who are the lowest salary and wage earners. I'll give more specifics about each one of these 4 in just a little bit. The second one is armed security officers. We have full-time armed security through our District 20 fleet of security officers, full-time at high school and middle. However, at the elementary level, they cover multiple sites. If the mill levy override would pass, we would put then a full-time security officer armed in each elementary school. Next is our facilities. A chunk of these dollars would go to support our existing facilities, not build new ones. We have over 35 sites in our school district, and these dollars would help maintain the upkeep of our facilities. Finally, third, by law, our charter schools, TCA and New Summit, they also would get a proportionate share of these dollars. So one of the most important questions up front is, what is this going to cost me? So here is a chart that summarizes this information for you. Now, on your property tax statement, you have a lot of numbers. 2 of the big numbers are 1, what's the actual home value of your particular home, and 2, what's your assessed value. The assessed value is a smaller number, not something that you would ever put your house on the market for. The actual home value is more in the ballpark of what you would actually put your house, put it up for sale. Now I have three different amounts here. 500,000 is one of them because the median home price within the District 20 boundary is a little over 450,000. But I encourage folks to look at the 100,000 because no matter what your home value is, you can get there from here. If your home has a value of 700,000, these numbers I'm about to show you, you will multiply them by 7. 400,000, multiply it by 4. So if we take this $100,000 line, when we move down the row here, what we know is this corresponds with the year 1, year 2, year 3 collection that I just showed you. These are the numbers in year 1 when we're collecting 1/3 of the dollars. Year 2 when we're collecting 2/3 of the dollars. And then year 3 when it's fully funded at $35 million. And again, the $35 million rate would continue down the line. How you read this is in collection year 1, the levy is at 53.03 mils right now. Because assessed valuation raised so much, our levy will fall next year. It will fall to a certain point. This point, perhaps, if the mill levy does not pass, if it passed, a little higher. So the levy itself will go down, but it would go down more if the mill levy override did not pass. What's that dollar difference? $2.28 per month per $100,000. Your home is valued at $700,000. The impact in year 1 is $2.28 times 7 per month. That is how much more a property owner would pay if the mill levy override were to pass. And if you move down each column, you see similar numbers. They grow a little bit because we're collecting more dollars in these years as well. $4.38, $5.97, still per month, still per 100,000. Now, if you've ever listened to a radio commercial for a car, at the end, do you hear $5, right? And you can't even hear it. But they are all of the finer points. Well, there are finer points with this as well, assumptions that are made. And these are shown down here. The first big one is that in 2024, that's collection year, it's estimated at a 30% assessed valuation increase for District 20. I can tell you that we received our preliminary assessed valuation just before Labor Day from the county, and it was 30%. Not 30.1, not 30.5, not 29.9, it was 30. So that's one that so far we see the numbers coming in. Our official could change a little bit, we get that in November, but that's how far we have right now. We are also basing it on a 6.765% RAR, the residential assessment rate. Now, as you go on, there are other assumptions that are made about 2025 and 2026. We try to make the best informed decisions that we can and projections. However, I always like to be transparent. If these were to change, it could modify these numbers as well. I don't see $2.28 going to 28 cents, and I don't see $2.28 going to $5.28. But I want to be completely transparent that if some of these underlying assumptions change in the future, it could modify these numbers as well. Now let's get a little context about funding for District 20 in the state of Colorado. So there are 178 school districts in the state of Colorado, and each school district has a per pupil revenue. It's the amount of money the school district receives per student. And what we know about District 20 is after a full list, if I go all 178 school districts in the state, District 20 receives the lowest per pupil funding in the state.
Is that per pupil funding from the state funding, or is that total funding?
There's something called total program funding. Total program funding represents how much funding each school district gets in the state. The easiest way to think about it, it's the number of kids times your per pupil revenue. And so for District 20, we have about 26,600 students. Our current per pupil revenue is $10,015. You multiply them together, you get, let's just say for argument's sake, about $250 million. That is called our total program funding. That dollar amount, the $10,015, that is dictated by the state legislature. When they convene in January, they begin working on what's called the School Finance Act. And by the time the legislature stops in the middle of May, we have what our dollar amount is going to be.
And why is our district the lowest in the state for state allocation?
Great question. So every school district starts with the same base amount. So if me and the other 177 CFOs were in here, we'd all start with the same base funding amount. And then additional dollars are added on based on local characteristics of the school district. For example, things like cost of living, size of the school district, not geographical size, but how many kids. Another factor that's very impactful, they call at risk. What it means is eligibility for free and reduced lunch. The larger your school district is, the less dollars you get per student, because the state assumes there's some economy of scale that can be gained by a larger school district. You can imagine some school districts have 50 kids in the whole district. They still need AP biology, AP calculus, kindergarten furniture. They still need all of that. So they may have per student $20,000 per student. So one factor is we're large, 26,600. That drives our funding down, that extra funding we would get on top of the base. Another critical factor is at risk, the eligibility for free and reduced lunch. Now, we certainly have economically disadvantaged families in District 20, no question. But when you compare us to District 11, Harrison, Denver Public Schools, we have relatively low at risk. Those two factors, there are others, but they are highly impactful. The first one, we have a lot of students, relatively large, drives our funding down. Couple it with low at risk, meaning relatively low free and reduced eligibility compared to other large school districts, that drops our funding as well. Those two come together and place us 178 out of 178. Now, you may be thinking, did anyone get a property statement in the spring that maybe had a flashing light associated with it, a siren that said assessed valuation is going up? And that is true. But two things to keep in mind. One is the levy in District 20 for last year was 53.03. Because assessed valuation is increasing so much, our levy will go down. When that statement went out to folks, it was still reflecting the 53.03. It doesn't show the lower levy for District 20. The second thing is, if I were sitting in your shoes, I would be wondering, if the tax amount is going up so much, why is not District 20, why would you be asking for a mill levy override? You're going to be collecting so many more property taxes. So let's look at it. So let's go over here. The gentleman's question in the back was about total program funding. Remember, I said number of kids times the amount per student. And we know for us, 26,600 students, about 10,015 per student. We said about 250 million. Picture that this jar or this bucket represents $250 million. How does the money get in there to fill it up? Well, first, we have the property taxes. We have to levy a certain mill levy amount, 27 mills. That's what we're required to levy. And all of those dollars we collect are this blue part, the district share, the local share it's referred to. The state's responsibility, this orange part, is to come in and fill in the rest of the money. Now, there's more complicating factors to this, something called budget stabilization factor. It's a fancy word to say the state doesn't have enough orange to fill all the buckets across 178 school districts. So we haven't been fully funded until, since back to 2010. Our budget stabilization factor, just in that time period, is over $260 million that has been withheld from District 20 because there's not enough orange to go around. Must be an Amber Alert or something.
Yeah,
You need to look at your, because I can feel it buzzing too. So please feel free to look at your phone, whatever you need to do. So total program funding, funded in 2 chunks, local share and the state puts in the rest. Let's go down here, because this jar represents increased assessed valuation. That's what we're experiencing. That is what I am experiencing at my home as well. Now, how do I know when I look at these 2 pictures that I've got increased assessed valuation? See how much more the blue is? That means I'm collecting more locally in District 20 for property taxes than over there. But notice again, have I changed the size of that bucket? Nope, still the same size, 250 million. What happens is the big difference that you see when we increase our local share, the state decreases their share. We don't have an overall net amount of funding that is any different from when we put less taxes locally. If we collect $20 million more in District 20 local property taxes, the state says, phew, we get to give District 20 $20 million less. And that is how it goes between local and state share. The other thing I want to point out is the icons at the top that say MLO. Notice they're not sticking to this jar. They don't do anything to this jar. Mill levy override is the equivalent of any local government entity that has the ability to levy a tax, to say, I'm taking matters into my own hands, and this entity is going to put a question on the ballot that asks the local community, would you consider giving additional property taxes for whatever the reasons are? If a mill levy override is passed, it does not impact this funding. The state can't take it away. They don't give us less orange because of the mill levy override. They are completely separate things. Mill levy override, you might hear, is locally controlled, and that's the message that goes with that. Now, a little bit more just about K-12 education in general across the nation. Colorado is 35th in the nation in terms of K-12 spending. And there was also a study done, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. There was also a study done on something called pay gap. Pay gap looks at people with commensurate degrees. So maybe everybody with a bachelor's degree who works in K-12 education, everybody with a bachelor's degree who does not work in K-12 education. And they calculated what's called the pay gap. Colorado has the largest pay gap. It's 50th in the nation. So let's go to the next slide. Now, earlier, again, I put this presentation together with the help of Allison Cortez and others from the perspective of if I did not have this information. And that's not really a stretch for me, because I only understood this is my 5th year as CFO. Prior to that, I was a teacher. I was a principal here at Discovery Canyon Middle School. I supervised principals. It was not until I became the CFO that I understood all of this. So really these slides are born out of the questions I would have. This was born out of when I came and first announced that we're asking for a $35 million MLO. 35 million, I don't know. I don't use numbers like that in my personal life. Is that a lot? Is it a little? Give me some context. And that's where this information is coming from. What I have up on the screen, quite often, school districts are compared to those of like size. And these are even a multitude of school districts that we're compared to, even with our CMAS data. And if we look, we can see these are the 6 school districts in the state of Colorado between 25,000 and 35,000 students. And when I look at it, what I see is District 20 is on this list. And what I see is, this is an MLO column. We already collect $26,750,862 per year. That is from 2 mill levy overrides that were passed in the past by voters in District 20. One in 1999 and one in 2008. There have not ever been any other requests for a mill levy override. The $2 amounts, first it was $12,750,862. The second amount was $14 million. You add them up, this is this amount. So let's look at some of these other school districts that are similarly sized. They're within 25,000 and 35,000 students. And again, they are ones that we are frequently compared to as we analyze our achievement data, etc. Boulder Valley collects $76 million each year in mill levy override. D11, Colorado Springs District 11, $75 million. St. Vrain, $67 million. Poudre, $62. District 20, $26. And then District 49, about $24 million. They also have a mill levy override on the ballot this year. Now, for me, when, again, these are such large numbers, I like context. What the difference between 26 million and 76 million is $50 million. What does that buy? Well, in District 20, to give every one of our staff members a 1% raise costs $2 million. Now, we're not asking for $50 million, but $50 million has the buying power of giving all of our staff a 25% raise. Let's look at starting teacher pay in these districts as well. Boulder Valley is just under 55,000. D11 started this year with 50,000. St. Vrain 56,000. Poudre 52. We've worked very hard in District 20 the last 2 years. We've given the largest pay salary increases in the history of the district with 10% and 9%. And that has pushed us to 48,800. District 49 is a little lower than us at 47,000. Now, when I started as a high school math teacher, I made 30,000. So now it's at 48,800. I will tell you, just as a point of fact, I have a number of teachers each year who tell me, Becky, I cannot afford to live in District 20. I would like to teach and live in the district, but I can't afford it. Just to give you an idea of what 48,800, I wanted to know. What does that look like? Well, I assume single with no dependents. And after you get the basic health insurance through Kaiser and taxes and the para contribution, which is a requirement that we have in our positions for the retirement, it's $3,069 per month in take home. And here are some typical expenses that I researched for this area. I did this back in July. Some folks have told me that you can no longer get a 1-bed, 1-bath in District 20 for $1,396 a month. They say it's more like $1,600. But I like to be very conservative, and I have some other things listed as well. I don't have a flat tire. I don't have, you have to go to the doctor, or clothing, or shoes, non-restaurant food costs only. But what you can see is that what I was trying to do is say, are these teachers right that it could be a struggle to live in this district? And I certainly saw, as a former math teacher, that the numbers show that. So, important fact, big number one fact here. There were 4 reasons we're asking for the mill levy override. Now is the time I'm going to go through each one as I just did and tell you exactly the amount of money that would go to each. And I'm going to refer, when I talk about the money, to the 35 million amount. So 18.5 million of the 35 million fully funded after the 3 years, right? I'm not going to collect 18.5 million total in the first year. But by the 3rd year, 18.5 million would go to compensation for teachers and support staff. What does that mean? Over a 3-year period, that's about the equivalent of a 9% raise. Not 9% each year, but over the course of it being fully funded. And that's it. You don't keep getting 9%. 18.5 million gets us about a 9% raise, and it would be collected in perpetuity to pay for that. That would put the starting salary in District 20 at about $53,000. Now, it doesn't mean that there wouldn't necessarily, there could perhaps be other salary increases, but they would depend on funding from the state. I'm simply talking about the mill levy override, what would that do for our staff? Next slide. We talked about security officers, and of course, as a parent, as an educator, as a community member, I hate that we even have to discuss this, but it is a reality. And so to put a full-time armed security officer in every one of our elementary schools, if you want to jot this down, $900,000. That is the amount for that. And I promise when we get to the end, the four numbers you have will add up to 35 million, but I want you to know what each piece is. The next one is facilities. We have well over 35 facilities in District 20, and they range. We have a toddler in Compass Heights is in its 3rd year. We have seniors that sit on the Air Force Academy. Doug Valley, 65 years old. Air Academy is 64 years old. And we have well over 35 facilities all in between. Just like your own home, there is facility maintenance that needs to be done. I just finished restuccoing my home. $12,000. I would much rather spend those dollars on my son's college fund or something else, but it's the reality of being a homeowner and having facilities. If you look at all of the facilities that we have in District 20 and the deferred maintenance, boilers, roofs, windows, it adds up to over $300 million. We can afford to allocate about $6 to $8 million per year on maintenance. The industry standard would say we should be spending about $40 million per year. But we have challenges with our budget. Like I said, funded dead last in the state, and the budget stabilization factor I mentioned, etc. They limit the amount of money that we can put into this. If the mill levy override were to pass, here's the third number to write down, 10 million in that 35 million fully funded, 10 million would go to facility maintenance. Again, not to build new facilities, to simply provide additional support to maintain the upkeep. Now, I mentioned we have a wide range of facilities, and 2 of them, Doug Valley and Air Academy, our oldest, sit on the Air Force Academy. There is a program through the Department of Defense called the Public Schools on Military Installations Program. When they identify schools, public schools that sit on military installations in need of either a lot of renovation or being rebuilt, they have a program that they will cost share with the school district. It's an 80%, 20%. So the Department of Defense would pay 80%, District 20 pays 20%. To give you an idea, Douglas Valley would probably cost about $36 million to rebuild. Air Academy, $200 million. So if District 20 could amass 20% of that full amount, the Department of Defense would pay the other 80% and allow 2 new schools to be built on the academy. Now, how would that happen? Well, these dollars that would come, the $10 million from the mill levy override, they're not to build new facilities. Again, they're to upkeep what we have. And so, if the mill levy override were to pass, how would that impact the project I just mentioned on the academy? Well, right now, we spend out of our general fund, that's the main place that we have our dollars, about $6 to $8 million on facilities. If the mill levy override were to pass, I could use those dollars to help our capital maintenance for a set of years, and we could save these dollars to put it towards the 20% match. The interesting thing that I also asked the Chief Operations Officer, I said, Brett, how much of the $300 million on this list is Air Academy and Doug Valley? $90 million. So to invest in rebuilding those schools not only gives our students 2 new facilities, but it also leverages the dollars to significantly reduce our backlog of capital maintenance projects. The next one, and this is the last number that you are going to write down to get to the 35 million. This is our charter schools. The dollars go to the charters on a proportional basis. How many students do they have out of the whole? They have about 16%. So when you do the math, fully funded, TCA and New Summit would receive about $5.6 million. Would that ever change? Only if their proportionality changed. Then we'd make an adjustment. I've worked with both leaders at TCA and New Summit, Mrs. McClelland and Dr. Thomason, and both have said that the funding that they would receive from the mill levy override would be used on the same things: salaries, facilities, and security. So why might somebody vote yes for this? Well, somebody might say, I like the reasons. I believe in these things. They might say, I like that the mill levy override proceeds are locally controlled. The state can't manipulate the funds or use these funding to cut your funding somewhere else. And other people might also say that they like the fact that it's a fixed dollar amount. Here's what I mean. So my son, he's only in 4th grade, and let's say when he's a junior, I tell my son, I say, Holden, when you go to college, I'm going to pay $10,000 per year for your college. By then it's going to be a lot more, but let's just say $10,000. Versus I tell him, Holden, I'm going to pay for your college every year. See the difference? One is a fixed dollar amount. This is a fixed dollar amount. The 2 mill levy overrides that passed in District 20 in 99 and 08 were fixed dollar amounts. The reason being, if it's a mill amount, some are like, we're going to levy 7 mills. What happens as the assessed valuation in the area goes up, what could be 35 million now, in 10 years, 7 mills is worth 50 million. And then it's worth 55 million. District 20 believes very strongly in transparency. And so the fixed dollar amount is always the way it was going to go. 35 million stays 35 million. No matter what assessed valuation goes up and up and up, it's still just valued at 35 million. Why might some people say no? Well, they might say the 35 million, I just said it, doesn't sunset. And people might say, I'm satisfied with District 20 now, but in 5 years, I might be disenfranchised. Yet some of my property taxes are still going to fund this mill levy override. Some might say, I don't think there's a K-12 funding problem for education in this state. There's a law in place that says funding for school districts, the base amount that we talked about earlier, is required to increase by at least the rate of inflation each year. So someone might say, I don't believe there's an issue. Finally, we know it's more expensive. If the mill levy override passes, people will pay more taxes than they would if it failed. And we went over those dollar amounts. Here's a look at what the actual language says. The top is a lot of the math. It talks about the fact that we would levy 35 million. And it talks about, do you remember earlier I said our current levy is 53.03? What we have in this levy, and I said the levy's going to fall because our assessed valuation has gone up. What I have in there is that over the next 3 years, we say the levy will not go higher than 53.03 over the next 3 years, period. Somebody says, well, Becky, what if you can't, then we wouldn't fully fund for some reason. Then the 35 million, we'd only collect 32 million if something happened to our dollars. But we're not, it doesn't look like that would happen, but we're saying again, to help homeowners temper a little to know that it would not skyrocket past the levy we have now. And then in 1999, when the voters passed that $12 million MLO, they also said that we say that it's good for District 20 to levy anything up to 60.216 mils, not over. You can see we're at 53.03. And so this reminds you that we never can breach that cap of 60.216. The yellow are the 4 reasons: the compensation, the facilities, the security, and the charters. And down at the bottom is accountability. Again, another cornerstone of District 20. So, you know, if I were looking at this, I'm not affiliated with the district, I say, so who's going to make sure they do everything they said they're going to do? Well, this would be an accountability committee, a citizens accountability committee comprised of staff members, community members, parents, and they meet with the CFO. Has nothing to do with Becky Allen. If today's my last day as CFO and I don't work here anymore, Doesn't matter. This is something that if this passes, this is required to happen, where this accountability committee needs to review how many dollars were brought in, better not be over 35 million, not even 35,000,001. And secondly, it better go to these things in yellow and not other things. We do this now with our bond. The last time we went to the voters was in 2016 for a $230 million bond. We're almost done. We're coming into the last stretch. But we have a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. And Mrs. Cloninger led that committee. Mr. Temby, they were both instrumental on the Citizens Bond oversight work and the GCNC, which was coming up with all of the projects. And this accountability for the bond used to meet monthly. Now we meet quarterly because there's much less activity. But a group of community members, staff members, and parents review everything we're doing to make sure every project on the list is being done and being done appropriately with the money. This is very important to us. And so this would be in there. This is just a summary of what I shared, but to let you know, a lot of this information, Allison does a wonderful job with our website. She's up here at the front. And much of this information is on the website should you want to look at it at another time. But is there any clarity I can provide? Mr. Temby.
So, Becky, thank you for the presentation. I think it's important to know that one of the reasons the mills will go down over time is we are retiring debt service on the bonds that we have also. And so if you look at the trajectory of the mill levy override, or the mills, that you pay, you would see a gradual decrease. And again, because we retired debt service, that's one reason we're at 53.03. We were capped when we passed the bond. We didn't increase taxes, but we did keep it at 60.216. And then we retired some of that debt service. So that's kind of the new level, 53.03. And this bond level creates a kind of evening that for the short term, because it's going to continue to go down at 53.03. So we are not elevating back to 60.216 mils, which is material, particularly since we all got punched in the head with our assessments over the past few months. So I really see this as being very responsible with money, but the reality is there is a national teacher shortage. This is not a D20 issue. This is a national teacher shortage with very few people in the pipeline. And so we're trying to get market share of the best educators that we can in every one of our schools, because that's where it happens in the district, in the classroom. And so this is a very important moment of reflection for the school districts.
Yes.
I'm just going to, just because I don't know who's here, and I'm just going to say, I'm Heather, and I was the one that was on the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. I was on the bond campaign as well. But I just wanted to say one of the things that I take away from this, I'm not sure you're going, I'm good, is that when we were doing the Citizens Bond Oversight, we were watching, like Becky said, we were watching every single thing that got done, in that it was completely following the language of the ballot. And that was what that oversight committee was about. The idea, I think, too, that people need to know as they look at this is that this isn't something that we just reprioritize and do no buses, or so, something that would, how we would, scrap another part of funding or something, and then we would magically come up with these numbers. No, it's going to come from these dollars that we would need from the mill levy. So that, to me, is one of the other reasons why it's important for this information to get out. We were fiscally conservative, have always been, and I'm a big spender, and I had to watch every single dollar that went through and make sure that it was being done for the right projects. And we did. And not only did we do that, but we were able to then drop below the line and gather some of the things that we had asked for but weren't on the ballot language. So we did the ballot language plus some, and that was something that was incredibly I think, powerful as a community member to see that that was happening. And I just wanted to say that that was something that we will do again, like it says there, with the mill levy override. Great time to come volunteer, watch what you do, because then you end up on the school board. But I am one of the school board members that did vote for this to be on the ballot. So if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Folks, I really appreciate you coming this evening. I'll be here if you have questions. If you get home, if you're like me, like at 2 a.m., you know, you roll over, or 2:13 is on the clock there, and you think of something, please don't hesitate to email it to me. My name's Becky Allen, but it's A-L-L-A-N. And if you give me a tough question that I can't just, and tough, sometimes it's hard to write my answer in a sentence, I'm going to give you my phone number and ask you to call me. That way we could talk it over. Yes, ma'am.
I would like this to pass, and thank you for your presentation. If this were not to not pass, how does that affect Air Academy in Douglas Valley and that project with the government?
Well, a likely outcome, when you look at almost 50 million, right, to do 20, and I'm rounding up a little bit. What we would try to avoid is debt. You know, cash on the barrel is something that we do as much as we can, but when you're talking about trying to do that level of millions. So it could either slow down our savings process, because where do you find the money to be able to tuck away and save? Or we'd have to look at some other ways of pursuing, are there debt opportunities that we, things like certificates of participation they're called, or COPs, we'd have to explore those. I like to try to stay away from debt as much as possible, but that would just kind of crunch down some of the options that we have.
So, but that's going to happen regardless, it's just finding creative ways to make it happen.
We just think that when we think about leveraging resources, to take 20% and turn it into 2 new schools, it is something that we think is an opportunity that leverages tremendous resources in our district. So we will scour every possibility to help support those schools.
It's also a one-time offer that's not coming back around from the military.
Well, yes, not kind of. So we're on the list.
We're on the list.
We're on the list. So what it means, you might hear people say this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Absolutely. But we could be working on this for 20 years. They won't kick us off the list. We'll stay on the list. There are some schools that have been on the list trying to pull together the funding for 10, 12 years. So when you think about length of how long, they'll never kick us out, but it could take a very, very long time. Does that?
And the problem is, it's some of the challenges that we had, because, you know, we're still building projects from 2016. Well, the escalation in cost, so the longer you wait, you know, I said all of a sudden then, Doug Valley, oh, now it's 40 million, now it's 42. You know, it has that change over time. So those are the pieces that would come into play. Well, thank you so much again. I truly appreciate you being here this evening. I'll help with any questions, but please feel free to